Welcome to the Stark Contrast podcast. I'm Kyle,
I'm Cooper.
and we're wrestling with topics revolving around leadership, culture, and performance. Why is Stark Contrast? One, father son. Two, he's tech savvy, I'm not. And three, hopefully a little deeper dive than buzzwords, pop culture, popular opinion as we wrestle with these different topics. So we invite you along in this journey and hope you enjoy.
Awesome. Well, Coop, we're going down this leadership journey. So what do you got for topic this week?
So I was recently reading a book that you have read called Do Hard Things. And it was talking about how for every coach like a Vince Lombardi or a notoriously tough coach, there are equal examples of supposed nice guy coaches that are just as successful, like Pete Carroll and some guys like that. And I always have done better with tougher coaches. So I was wondering how to best balance being a supposed player's coach with being with just being tough on your guys, or being a leader, being a tough leader, but also being kind and being a good teammate.
That's an awesome question. I guess I'd maybe ask you a few questions and we can try to figure out what that maybe looks like for you. The coaches, do you have examples of coaches that are hard that maybe didn't have the same impact on you as some other coaches that were hard on you?
Well, I think that I don't know that I have any specific examples necessarily.
I guess do you think so you gravitate more to hard coaches than maybe more players coaches? Is that safe to say?
Yeah.
And would you say that you gravitate equally to all hard coaches, or do you notice any differences in some of those?
I would say I gravitate toward hard coaches, but they have a clear standard over coaches that are just they're hard coaches just because they want to be a pain in the butt,
Yep. So all tough, demanding coaches aren't created equal?
No. I have to understand the standard. So I would say when you're working towards a common goal, like winning a championship, I would say that's when I like the coach better for being tough on guys.
Rather than just being tough to be tough.
Yeah.
So how about the research that was showed for every example of a Vince Lombardi or a demanding coach, there's examples of more player coaches that are successful. Did the book share any more information behind that, or any more research behind that, or why maybe those, like Pete Carroll, why he's successful?
Well, so I believe that the book about support and how most people need support. And it said that I can't remember what the example they gave, but there was this, I think it was at Texas A&M or something like that. They had a football camp and got a bunch of people to quit. And then 3 years later, they won the national title, but only 8 of the players who went on the football camp were still on the national title team. And they weren't the stars. So I think that was one of the main stats. Other than that, I would say that it was just kind of thrown out there.
Yep. So yeah, that's referencing Bear Bryant back in the Junction Boys days when he took over Texas A&M before going to Alabama. Would you say that Pete Carroll's demanding?
I would say that he is, but I would say he's less demanding than some other coaches in terms of being in terms of being a perfectionist, so to say.
So would you say that it's less demanding? Like, is it a quantity less demanding, or is it maybe look different? Is it a style difference?
Probably style difference.
Okay. Have you ever played for a coach that is maybe more supportive, that you really gravitated to, that you really responded well to?
Well, my T-ball coach was very supportive, but I don't remember that too well, so can't really say that I recall
Yeah.
too many super supportive coaches that I've loved.
Yeah. So let's maybe tease out this idea a little bit, and then let's talk about what it maybe looks like for you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Maybe I could be a waiter. I just asked you a question as you were putting something in your mouth as you're taking a drink. I think that's part of being a good waiter, isn't it?
That might be you're going to be a first round pick in the 2023 waiter draft.
Nice. You're very supportive. Your nice words and speaking greatness to me are making me feel really good about myself. Buckled. All right. So as you think through this, so the research, again, Do Hard Things by Steve Magness, great book. And really the idea behind it is that our common notions of toughness may not be accurate, right? This idea, which is fitting as we're a stark contrast, giving a different side of something, where the lessons of toughness are coming from a lot of military examples, which actually are selection and assessment programs, more selecting candidates as opposed to development programs. And then also just great stories that we talk about that we really gravitate to with the high standards. And what they've shown is, and looking at different studies and different research, and it's interesting that one study that's referenced in Do Hard Things is a study out of Eastern Washington, which was done by John Hammermeister, who we know, Hammer. But it was this idea of the supporting side is important as well. And so if at the end of the day we say it's not supporting or demanding, it's both, right? So it's this idea of high standards, high expectations, high challenge, high demanding, but it's also got to be in a supporting place. And if it's one or the other, if we just have high demand, high challenge, and we've got no support, what are some potential negative things that could happen?
Well, you get players or even coaches that feel like they are on an island, trying to fight towards a goal that only they have, and no one else has it. So it's just them being by themselves. And then you also have people who lose sight of the common goal, even if everyone's working towards the same common goal. They don't see the head coach, or they don't see their teammate working the same way that they are.
So there could be some isolation, right? You feel like you're all alone. I'm hearing from you also. What happens if it's too demanding? Like it's just the demands are people can't meet. What happens in that situation?
People will often quit, and maybe, and oftentimes they'll take teammates with them. The issue is not that the one person will quit; it's that they'll take the 8 other players with them.
Yeah. So they make. I'm sorry, I was just going to say they may quit, but they're also going to influence the people around them, right? I got you again.
Yeah, that was my fault.
What about and even if they don't actually quit, we may go into survival mode, right? And may not be pursuing excellence. We go in survival mode just because I'm just trying to keep my head above water because it's so demanding, right?
Yeah.
What about on the other side? If you've got a situation that's all support, no demand, and it's like everybody loves everybody and we're giving everybody hugs, what are the potential negative consequences there?
Well, you get people that don't work as hard, you get laziness, and you get like the expectation drops and people are like, oh, you didn't go out and you didn't play well, but that's okay because we just had fun, right? Winning's fun.
So we get lots of sprinkles, but not sprinkles are for winners. No, we get lots of trips to the Dairy Queen. Everybody's having fun, but we're not necessarily achieving, right?
Yeah.
So the lesson is we've got to have both. We've got to be able to be challenging and supporting, because if it's just challenging and the people don't feel supported, then people potentially break, they quit, they tap out, they go into survival mode. Likewise, if it's just supporting and there's no challenge, then everybody's comfortable and complacent. We're not getting better and not growing. So as we share that, what does that look like for you as you think about maybe a Pete Carroll or a different personality, or maybe even some coaches you've had that you really gravitate to or don't gravitate to? Walk me through as you look at this through a challenging and supporting as opposed to a challenging or supporting.
I think that oftentimes you see coaches who obviously they're either too challenging or too supportive. We just went through all that. But I think that even when you have somebody who's both challenging and supporting, I think they often lean one way or the other. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, that's just more stylistic. But I think that that's important to realize that there isn't one way to lead correctly. So I think that that's important to realize as well.
So let's pull out a couple big ideas as we go through this. So big idea number one is we need to be challenging and supporting, not one or the other, right?
Yes.
Big idea number two is each of us are going to have our own style and naturally gravitate to one or the other, and we've got to be authentic in that, right?
Yeah.
And so as you talk about, there's lots of different ways to skin a cat. There's lots of examples of coaches that are maybe a little bit more challenging, a little bit more supporting. Good coaches do both, but they've got to be authentic to themselves. Pete Carroll's a great example. You mentioned him earlier. Pete Carroll tried to coach the way he thought everybody was supposed to coach in the NFL, all demanding, all demanding, all demanding. He realized that wasn't authentic to him. And as he tapped into more of that supportive side, which I've spent some time with Pete, he's a high demanding guy, but he also recognized he needed to be himself and be authentic with himself. And so to tap into more of that support side, and what did that look like? So each coach has their own style. What would you say about your style? Where are you at on this? How do you navigate challenging and supporting yourself, not as a coach, but as a leader?
I would say I am definitely more demanding than especially other people my age. I definitely have a higher standard. But at the same time, I would say that, like, if you're going through something and I know you need something, I'm willing to be there. But at the same time, no excuses, right? You got to power through it.
So when you're at your best, leading and influencing your teammates, what does that look like? And when you're maybe at your worst, what does that look like?
Well, I think I'm at my best when I can just kind of lead by example, as opposed to being very vocal about it. But I would say that it's helping my teammates achieve the standard that I'm trying to reach, or that we've set, helping them reach that. And then when I'm at my worst, it's, dude, why aren't you achieving that standard? Rather than trying to build them up.
That's awesome. So the lead by example thing, that might be our topic for next week, because we could go down some rabbit holes on the whole lead by example thing. But what I heard from you was that when you're at your best, there's more of an element of help like I'm trying to help someone reach our standard. And when you're at your worst, it's probably more of a disconnect and pointing the finger and why aren't you reaching my standard, or maybe it's our standard, but there's a separation between you and your teammate when you're not at your best.
For sure.
What do you know what some of those things are? Like what are some keys for you to be in a good spot where you're helping and your teammates feel like you're helping? And maybe what's an obstacle that can potentially derail you?
I think one of the biggest things is not so much being in a good mood as much as just having, like, knowing where my heart's at, you know what I mean? And not being ticked off on every little thing about every little thing. So I think that when I'm off, I'm just angry. And then when I'm better, I wouldn't say I'm not angry when I'm better, but I would say I take that anger and I use it to help build other people up rather than screaming at people because they did something wrong.
So would you say when you're going good, you're being more intentional and operating out of the values and the things that matter most to you? And when you're not as good, maybe it's a little bit more emotional reaction to things. More purposeful intention, which leads to response versus more emotions fueling a reaction.
Yeah.
What's your key to, you said, and I love that you said it's not so much about being in a good mood, because then it's like, well, how do I feel today?
Yeah.
But what are the keys for you to make sure that you're in a good spot that is others focused, that is intentional on trying to help people? What's a key or two that you need to make sure is in play?
Well, I think just staying strong in my faith is very important.
Yep.
Just reading the Bible daily helps keep me in a spot where I'm not going to get ticked off at my teammates because they screwed up, which, I mean, we're all going to screw up. We're human. Sometimes I just wish it didn't happen at that time. But I think just making sure my faith stays strong is probably the most important thing. But beyond that, I would say making sure I remember that we're all trying to achieve a common goal.
So it's not you versus them.
Yeah.
So interesting as we're talking about this in terms of leading others. Let's start with great leaders lead themselves, right? So as you talk about the things you need to do to be the leader you need to be, but I'm curious, even specifically, what does the challenging and demanding and supporting dynamic look like in terms of how you treat yourself? So one thing's how do you treat your teammates as they screw up or high expectations, whatever else. What about as you think about yourself? How would you slant on yourself, demanding and supporting?
Well, I think a lot of times I'm like if I fail a lift, man, why did I fail that? I could have gotten that. Or if I drop a pass, it's like, what are we doing? Come on, dude. You have better hands than that. Or why'd you think about dropping that ball? So I think that a lot of the time I'm pretty hard on myself. And I think being hard on myself can be a good thing because it pushes me to do it right the next time, be better. But I would say that the key for me is to remember that was just one play. The next, I got another one. Next down, I got another play. Or next lift in weightlifting, I can attempt a higher weight or the same weight, and I can get it. So I think that that's important for me to remember, that one play, lift, jump is not going to decide everything for me.
How well do you remember that with your teammates? Good question.
Uh, I remember it in practice.
Yeah.
In games, it's a lot tougher.
Do you so going back to focusing on yourself, and you touched on, hey, I got to be demanding because you got to raise the bar, which that's again the point of it's got to be demanding and supporting. Sounds like you have a decent balance so with yourself that you're able to make sure you have the supporting side too, so that it's not just beat down on yourself.
Yeah, but a lot of the times it's not in the moment. A lot of the times
After.
it's after. It's like I say this has never happened, obviously, but say I drop the game-winning touchdown pass. For a good 3 days, I would not. That would be all I would think about is the ball was right there in my hands and I dropped it. And I would be very angry about that, very disappointed. But eventually I would get to the point where I was like, hey, we got another game next week, you know? And oftentimes there was one play where I thought I missed a tackle, or I thought I was slow getting to my spot, and we gave up a 93-yard touchdown on a screen pass. And I was like, man, that was all my fault. That sucked. And then 2 days later, I watched the film and it wasn't my fault. And I realized that. And I think a lot of the times I think that I'm better than I am, be it at a sport or at school, at chess, whatever. I look at something and I'm like, man, that was my fault. When in fact, it could have been that the other team or the other dude just made a really good play.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you talk about that supporting side, you've shared a couple of great reminders. One being to make sure we're dealing with facts and not feelings, right? What is the actual, are we being honest with our assessment, or are we just emotional in terms of what I feel like should have or shouldn't happen? I think your reminder to be able to zoom out and not be defined by that limited performance, and to be able to look at the bigger picture and know that I've got another opportunity, I think is a great reminder. And then I think the other part, as you were sharing that idea of, hey, dude, what's wrong? It's almost like you're talking to a third person, which Steve Magnus talks about in his book, about that ability to create some separation between the ego of myself and to refer to yourself in third person, or to depersonalize it a little bit. I think all of those are great examples of being able to maybe provide some more of the supporting side without it being a warm, fuzzy, let's just hug them and everything's okay. You're not lowering demanding in order to be supporting, right? It's a both and idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about, in terms of you got to be demanding and supporting, we've talked about that each of us have a style and probably gravitate to one or the other a little bit more, and need to be aware of that, need to be authentic in that. The third thing that I think is important as we go into this is, as a coach or leader, I've also got to be aware of the person in front of me, right? It's not just to be authentic to myself. Well, this is how I am. I got to recognize the person in front of me and what do they need. And so as you think about that, let's not name names, but are there some teammates that you can immediately think, yeah, I can probably be more demanding with this individual, but I probably need to be a little bit more supporting with this person, and or just demanding and supporting might look different with these people?
For sure. Yeah.
Share with me how you might approach, in your mind, think a couple different teammates. Again, don't name names, but think of a couple different teammates that maybe and talk me through what your approach might look differently with them.
Well, so if I'm talking to the freshman cornerback who just wants to learn and wants to grow, it's going to be really easy for me to be supportive and be like, hey, this is what you need to do. You're doing really great. You're getting better. Whereas if I'm talking to someone who's a senior and they're going to be starting, and they mess up on a play and I say something, they're probably going to be a little more defensive. Like, well, you couldn't have made that play. It's like, why do you want me to make that play if you couldn't have done it? So I think that it's a lot easier to be supportive with people who want to learn versus people who are unwilling, or not even unwilling, but just don't want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so I'm hearing from you, it's not just maybe a personality where that person's more gravitates more demanding or more supporting. There's probably an element of even a relationship here, right? Where someone's already given you permission to be demanding with them, and to be able to recognize where are you at in your relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like for examples, I think about, let's use you and me as an example. You may lean more towards demanding, but if you don't trust me, you're probably not going to say, yeah, go ahead and push me and challenge me. I see the smirk. You trust me. But right where you're naturally demanding, but if there's somebody that's, hey, I don't really trust you. I don't trust your motives. I don't trust your alignment, which you shared earlier. You may not say, hey, I don't know that I'm giving you permission to be as demanding, versus a situation. And so in that situation, I may need to be a little bit more supporting in order to build relationship and trust. The flip side is you naturally gravitate to demanding. You trust me, we've got it, let's go, and I can push.
Yeah, because I think that oftentimes I think that it's really easy to just naturally be demanding or supportive. Just naturally, the way whatever you wanted, whatever you feel, versus knowing what your teammates or players or fellow coaches or whatever need.
Yep. So as we kind of put a bow on this conversation, and I want you to kind of share just big takeaway. So there's an element of being able to be demanding and supporting, which is hard, right? Being able to do both of those. The ability to recognize each of us have a natural style, and what does that look like? So I need to know myself. That's hard. And then I also need to be very intentional and aware of who's in front of me and what does this person need, which adds a whole nother level. We're starting to see why leadership's really hard. So as I frame that out for you, give me one or two big takeaways for you of something that maybe crystallized, something that's going to give you a renewed focus as you go to trying to be the best leader you can be for your teammates.
I think that one of probably the biggest thing for me is to make sure I'm holding myself to the same standard and but still giving myself the same support that I would give to any of my teammates. Just because I think that is the start of becoming a great leader. You know, my coach he always says greatness, and that's his thing. So I think, like, when you really want to start greatness, you have to start by being great yourself. So I think that's number one. And then number two, I would say, is probably make sure you have a relationship and you know what the other person needs. Is probably my second one, because I can see all the things and I can have all of the answers, but if I can't give my teammate the answers in a way that he'll respond, then there's no point for me even having the answers.
That's awesome. No, this is really good, and I can't wait. I mean, I think lead by example is a rabbit hole we can go down. Relationship, what does that mean? Because we throw that buzzword around a lot too. So I'm fired up where maybe we go next. So thanks, Coop. I'm better for this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you.
See you, dude.
Yeah.